Well, good morning, Crossroads Church. Good to see you all. I want to welcome our other campuses, our Cottage Grove, our Eagan, our Hastings campus, our Woodbury campus, and the hundreds of people who watch online in their pajamas every weekend. We're glad you're all here. We're in a series from an Old Testament character, the Hebrew Scriptures, whose name is Joseph. Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat guy. That's him. Yeah, we're in a series on his life. And we've moved into week 4 of this particular series. And I am so excited today because I'm going to be team teaching. It's not just me up here today, but I'm going to be team teaching with my very, very good friend, Bozo the Clown. So we're going to bring out Bozo right now. Yeah.
When you said you wanted to team teach, I thought you were talking about me.
No. Well, unless your name is Bozo.
Oh, well,
yeah, get out of here.
We know that's true.
Yeah. So this is my friend Bozo the Clown here. And if you know anything about Bozo here, Bozo is what's called a bop bag. A bop bag. Say it out loud with me. A bop bag. Yeah, and all that means is when you pound him in the nose, he bounces back. I love this character right here. I can't wait to have this in my office and use it often. But anyway, he's a bop bag, and the reason he bops back is because he is weighted on the bottom. He has what's called a ballast. A ballast. There is a ballast on the bottom so that every time you punch him, he comes back up. It doesn't matter, how many times you punch him. And I've already punched him probably 100 times, just testing this whole theory out. He comes bouncing back. And some of you feel like that Bozo the Clown. You feel like a bop bag, don't you? You've walked into one of our campuses today, and you feel like life has been doing this to you. Right? Some of you feel that way. You feel like you're getting punched. You feel like you're being pummeled. You feel like you're being pounded by life. Life has been cruel to you. Maybe it's at school. Maybe it's at school. Maybe it's at home. Maybe it's at work. Maybe you feel like you've been pounded just physically. Some of you are, or emotionally, or spiritually, or relationally. And if that's where you're at, I'm so glad you're here because we're going to learn a lot today from Bozo the Clown. We really are. Actually, we're going to learn a lot from Joseph the Hebrew, but their lives intersect. And again, if you're feeling like you've been pounded, I'm so glad you're here because as we look back at Joseph's life this weekend, again, we're going to see a guy who just had this amazing, amazing capacity to bounce back. His brothers hate him, right? We're going back to week 1. Joseph's brothers hate him. They throw him into an empty cistern. Boom, pound, punched in the nose. What does he do? He bounces back. And then he ends up being sold to some Ishmaelite traders who trade him off to a high-ranking official in Potiphar's cabinet, a guy by the name of Potiphar. And Potiphar's wife just pursues him. Tries to get him to sleep with her, and he resists time after time after time after time, and then she finally screams out that he's molesting her, and Joseph ends up in prison. Bopped on the nose again, but he bounces back up. And this is where we're going to pick up the story today. If you think Joseph's bopping is over, you're premature in that thinking, because as we're going to see today, he receives another punch in the nose, and it comes in the form of delay. It comes in the form of your life being pushed on hold. And if that's where you feel like you're at today, if you're waiting for something, if you're waiting for a break, or you're waiting for a mate, or you're waiting for healing, or you're waiting for an answer to prayer, or you're waiting for a job, or you're waiting for something, if you're waiting for anything today, this message from the life of Joe is for you. So grab a Bible. Let's get right to Genesis chapter 40. It's the very first book of the Bible. I'll give you a chance to find it or open up your Bible app. We're going to just park in Genesis chapter 40 and 41 for quite a while today. Now, as you're turning there, let me give you a little bit of the backstory. We're going to chapter 40 here. What's going on? Well, Joseph is in prison, all right? And while he's been in prison, he has, again, in typical Joseph style, he has risen to the ranks. He's impressed the guy over all the prison systems, and so Joseph has been promoted. He's now overseeing other prisoners. And 2 of the prisoners that are in jail with him used to work for the Pharaoh, the big cheese, the king over all of Egypt. The one was Pharaoh's cupbearer, and the other one was Pharaoh's chief baker. And they're in prison with Joseph. We're not really sure why, what they did, but they're in prison with him, and they have these dreams. And in prison, Joseph, this is one of his gifts, he interprets the dreams of these two workers. And that's where we're going to pick up the story in verse 12. Here we go. This is Joseph now. This is what the dream means, Joseph said. The 3 branches that you saw in your dream represent 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift you up and restore you to your position as chief cupbearer. Now, just so you know, a little aside here, the chief cupbearer back in this ancient world, most kings, most princes, most really, really important people would have a cupbearer, because back in that ancient day, there was a lot of bad stuff going on. And so you never knew when someone slipped some poison into your drink. So a cupbearer, their job was literally to do this. To take a drink before the cup was passed off to the king, to the Pharaoh. And if you didn't fall down and die, the king would take the cup and drink it. You thought your job was bad. Yeah, just think about your job is drinking something for the king, and if you don't fall over and die, then he gets his drink. So that's what this guy did. That's what the cupbearer was. All right? I don't know why I brought this up, but anyway. And please remember me. Joseph's saying to this guy, he's just interpreted his dream, the cupbearer's dream. Please remember me and do me a favor when things go well for you. Mention me to Pharaoh so that he might let me out of this place. And now Joseph just shares a little bit of his woes. He says, for I was kidnapped from my homeland, the land of the Hebrews, and now I'm here in prison, but I did nothing to deserve it. In other words, hey, guy, cupbearer for Pharaoh, you're going to be released. I'm predicting you're going to be released. And when you're sitting there with Pharaoh, when you have the Pharaoh's ear, I want you to tell Pharaoh my sad story. Because he knows, Joseph knows, that Pharaoh has the power to do this. And he can be released from prison. So things are looking good here. This is possibly the break that Joseph has been waiting on. Let's pick up the story, verse 20. Pharaoh's birthday came 3 days later, and he prepared a banquet for all his officials and staff. He summoned his chief cupbearer, there's our guy, and chief baker to join the other officials. He then restored the chief cupbearer to his former position so he could again hand Pharaoh his cup. But Pharaoh impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph had predicted when he interpreted his dream. Okay, not so good for the baker, right? If you don't know what impaling is, do not Google it. Do not Google it. Yeah. No more baking. He's baked his last batch of cookies, right? But the good news is the cupbearer, the guy who hands Pharaoh his cup after taking a sip and making sure he didn't die, he's been released. And so this is all lining up now for Joseph. The guy that Joseph helped in prison is now released. And so again, we're feeling good about this, right? We're feeling good. He's going to go and tell Pharaoh his story. Pharaoh's going to go, oh my, let's let the guy out. It's all lining up, right? Well, not really. Pharaoh's chief cupbearer, however, you ready for this? Forgot all about Joseph, never giving him another thought. And all of a sudden, Bozo the clown, i.e. Joseph the Hebrew, takes another bop in the nose. Genesis chapter 41, verse 1. Next chapter, 2 full years later, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing on the bank of the Nile River. Okay, time out now. We got somebody else dreaming here. The Pharaoh's dreaming. But before we get there, I want you to see something here. Moses, who compiled the very first 5 books of our Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Moses wants us to know something. He wants us to understand something here. He puts this together in such a way that we know now that it's been 2 full years that Joseph has done what? Sat in a prison cell with shackles on his ankles. For 2 full years, Joseph has done nothing but wait and watch, thinking today's the day. Today's the day that I'm going to be released. He's been waiting and waiting and waiting. He has sat in prison for 17,520 hours, waiting for a break. waiting for God to finally answer his prayers, waiting for God to move. And 17,520 hours later, nothing has happened. And when you take the 2 years that Joseph has been in prison and add on the other time that Joseph has been in Egypt, and you add it all up, and you get 13 years. Think about that. It's been 13 years now for Joseph. 13 years of being dragged away from his homeland. 13 years of his life have been spent somewhere he doesn't want to be. His life has been on hold. Time for Joseph has stood still. Time for Joseph, the last 13 years, have moved about as fast as an Alaskan glacier. And you think about that. When you add it all up, the 2 years in prison, the 11 years just in Egypt being a slave, you add all that up, friends, and what do you have? You have a guy, you have Joseph, who is just ripe for getting cynical. You got a guy who's ripe for becoming bitter and angry and resentful toward God. You've got this guy who's got 13 years of being disappointed, 13 years of his prayers not being answered. And you add all of that up, and what you've got is a guy who could have easily given up on God, who could have easily concluded that God has gone on permanent vacation. And I bring that up because that's how Joseph could have felt. And I bring that up because that's how many of you actually do feel. Because you've been waiting, and you've been waiting, and you've been waiting. And all you've heard is God's silence. All you've gotten is nothing more than staring at some prison wall, whatever that is for you. You feel forgotten. You feel like God has abandoned you. And friends, I get it. But I also want you to get here what Joseph did, because Joseph never gave up. Joseph may have felt like he should have, but he never did. He never stayed down. He kept getting back up again and again. He keeps believing over and over and over again that God is still with him. Even though he's not where he wants to be, he still believes that God is there with him. And he finally gets his break. Because Pharaoh has a dream. Pharaoh has this dream, and Pharaoh's dream involves these fat cows and these skinny cows. His dream involves these luscious, robust crops and then these scrawny crops. And he can't figure out what the dream is all about. And so what does he do next? Well, we're going to pick up the story because he's not a happy camper. And let me just tell you this. When Pharaoh's not a happy camper, nobody's a happy camper, all right? It's just like when mama's not a happy camper, you know what I mean? All right, I learned that growing up as a kid. So we're going to pick the story back up. Genesis chapter 41, verse 8. The next morning, Pharaoh, he's got this dream, was very disturbed by the dreams. So he called for all the magicians, all the wise men of Egypt. When Pharaoh told them his dreams, not one of them could tell him what they meant. They're clueless, in other words. Finally, and this is where the bell goes, this is where the light bulb goes off for the cupbearer. Finally, the king's chief cupbearer spoke up. Oh, today I have been reminded of my failure, he told Pharaoh. Some time ago, you were angry with the chief baker and me, and you imprisoned us in the palace of the captain of the guard. One night, the chief baker and I each had a dream, and each dream had its own meaning. There was this young Hebrew. Yeah, I remember this guy. This young Hebrew man with us in the prison who was a slave of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he told us what each of our dreams meant. And everything happened just as he predicted. Wow. 2 years later, the light bulb goes off. 2 years later, the chief cupbearer remembers what's going on, and he tells Pharaoh, hey, I know a guy. Yeah, I know this guy, and he interpreted our dreams. And Pharaoh calls for Joseph. And you can read this on your own, but they clean him up, they shave him, they put new clothes on him, and all of a sudden, Joseph is paraded into Pharaoh's presence, the most powerful man on the planet. And Joseph gets to hear Pharaoh share his dream. This dream of the five fat cows and the 5 skinny cows, the seven fat cows, 7 scrawny, the 7 heads of grain that were all kind of shriveled up, and the ones that were broke, all this stuff. He shares his dream with him. And what will Joseph do? Well, how will he respond? Well, we're going to see right here. Joseph responded. Here it is. He's heard about these 7 cows, this, and 7 cows that, and 7 grains over here and over here. And he responded. Both of Pharaoh's dreams mean the same thing. Okay, pray tell. God is telling Pharaoh in advance what he is about to do. The 7 healthy cows that you saw in your dreams and the 7 healthy heads of grain both represent 7 years of prosperity. The 7 thin, scrawny cows that came up later and the 7 thin heads of grain, withered by the east wind, okay, they represent 7 years of famine. This will happen just as I have described it. For God has revealed to Pharaoh in advance what he is about to do. The next 7 years will be a period of great prosperity throughout the land of Egypt. But afterward, the next 7, there will be 7 years of famine so great that all the prosperity will be forgotten in Egypt. Famine will destroy the land. This famine will be so severe that even the memory of the good years will be erased. As for having 2 similar dreams, it means that these events have been decreed by God, and he will soon make them happen. All right, what's going on here? What's going on here? Well, all that's going on here is Joseph interprets the dream. Joseph just lays the cards on the table, and he says, hey, Pharaoh, this is all about what's going to happen in the future. The next 14 years look like this. We're going to have 7 years of prosperity, 7 years of fat cows, 7 years of robust crops. But those 7 years are going to be followed by 7 years of leanness, 7 years of famine in the land. I love this. He just interprets the dream. He just lays the cards out on the table. But the other thing that Joseph does here that's so important that we understand is he starts talking about God. He starts pointing Pharaoh, the guy who thought he was God, he starts pointing Pharaoh to the God. And he mentions God over and over. Verse 25, if your Bible's open, God is telling Pharaoh. Verse 25. Verse 28, God has revealed to Pharaoh. Verse 32, these events have been decreed by God. In other words, Pharaoh, shut up and listen to the capital God. You think you're God. You're just a little case G God. The real God is speaking here. Joseph is God this and God that, God this and God that. Joseph, I want you to hear this, friends. Joseph emerges from prison, not bitter with God, but bragging about God. He emerges from prison, not bitter with God, but he emerges from prison bragging about God to the guy who thought he was God. And then without even taking a breath, he gives this king unsolicited advice, something that nobody would have done. Here's what he says. Therefore, Pharaoh, here's what I want you to do, all right? Pharaoh should find an intelligent and wise man and put him in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Okay? Knowing that there's going to be 7 fat years and 7 lean years, Pharaoh, well, here's what you should do. Let me just tell you what you should do. You should find a guy and have that person manage things in such a way that they'll collect a bunch of good stuff here, knowing that this season is coming next. And so everybody's amazed. Everybody's amazed at this young millennial named Joseph telling Pharaoh what to do. And it's just, there's nothing surprising here, right? He ends up in Pharaoh's household as a slave. And what does he do? All of a sudden, Potiphar, he ends up in Potiphar's household as a slave, and Potiphar sees something in this guy, this young guy, and he puts him in charge of his entire household. He ends up in prison, and the prison guard, the guy in charge of the prison system, saw something in Joseph, and he promoted him so that Joseph was in charge of the other prisoners. And now Joseph has gone nose to nose with the most powerful man on the planet, and what does the most powerful man on the planet do? He sees something. He sees something in Joseph as well. Skip down to verse 39. You won't believe it. Look what happens. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, okay, since God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you, clearly no one else is as intelligent or wise as you are. Joseph, you will be in charge of my court, and all my people will take orders from you. Only I, Pharaoh, the big cheese, only I, sitting on my throne, will have a rank higher than yours. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I thereby put you in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh removed his signet ring, signifying authority, from his hand and placed it on Joseph's fingers. He dressed him in fine linen clothing and hung a gold chain around his neck. Then he had Joseph ride in the limo, the chariot reserved for his second in command. And whenever Joseph, wherever he went, the command was shouted, kneel down. So Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of all Egypt. And Pharaoh said to him, I am Pharaoh, but no one will lift a hand or foot in the entire land of Egypt without your approval. Now, when you're reading the Bible like this, what you should say out loud right now when you get done reading something like that is, what in the world just happened? What in the world just happened? Pharaoh just took this young Hebrew and he put him in charge of the entire land of Egypt after knowing him for what, like 20 minutes? What in the world here is going on? And I think it's a fair question, isn't it? Because every time we've studied this guy named Joseph, we see someone bopping him on the nose, but then just a few minutes later, he's back up on his feet. I mean, what is it about this guy? How does this guy have such resiliency? What is it about Joseph that he just keeps bouncing back? What is it about Joseph that instead of being bitter when he's down here, he bounces back and he's better? What is it? What is it about the guy? Because I don't know about you, but whatever that is, I want it, don't you? Because life does this to us, and I want to do that. I want to do what Joe did. I want to do what Bozo does. And what is it about Joseph that made him bounce back time after time after time, not getting bitter, but getting up and being better? What is it? And here's the answer. The answer is right here. He kept believing that God was with him. That's it. He had this belief. He had this core foundational belief that never wavered. He had this belief that it didn't matter where he was at, he believed and he acted as if it were true that God was with him. With him in the empty cistern, yeah. With him in Potiphar's house as he's running for his integrity and his character, yeah. With him in prison where he didn't want to be. With him as he stood nose to nose with the most powerful man on the planet, yeah. He believed that God was with him. And it was that belief that kept Joseph bouncing back time after time after time after time. And what I want to call this belief that Joseph had, that God was with him, I want to call it a ballast belief. It was Joseph's ballast belief. Going back to our friend here, Bozo the clown. The reason why Bozo bounces back, I'll say it again, he's got a ballast. He's got a weighted bottom. Make up your own joke. He's got a weighted bottom. Some of you will. And you will share it with me. Thank you. Yeah, he had a weighted bottom so that every time someone punches this thing right here, the ballast counterbalances the punch and he comes back up on his feet. And that is exactly, friends, what Joseph the Hebrew had. A ballast belief that kept him getting back up on his feet. So let me ask you a question. So where do you find yourself today? I know. Some of you, I'm sitting in the Hastings campus. I'm sitting in the Cottage Grove campus. I'm sitting in the Egan campus. I'm sitting in the Woodbury campus. I'm sitting at home. No. That's not what I'm asking you. Where do you find yourself today? Like in life. Where do you find yourself? I want you to think about that. Are you somewhere you want to be? Some of you might say, well, hey, Pastor Phil, I'm on the pinnacle right now. I'm living large. I'm living the dream. I'm experiencing everything I'm living the dream life right now. And if you are, we hate you. No, we don't hate you. Seriously, we don't hate you. We might be a little bit jealous, might be a little bit envious, but we applaud you. Maybe you're on the pinnacle of success, and if you are, good for you. But maybe others of you are down here somewhere. Maybe you're actually in a pit somewhere. Or maybe some of you are in between, or some of you are free falling from up here down here. Maybe some of you maybe you are being praised and you're being pampered, you're being promoted, or on the other hand, maybe you're being punched, and maybe you're being pummeled, and maybe you're being pounded. And what I want to say to you, and I want to say this to myself as well, that it doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter if you're up here or down here or somewhere in between. What you need and what I need is a ballast belief. What we need is something to hang on to, something that will ground us when we're up here on the mountaintop, so we don't get all prideful, so we don't get all egotistical, so we don't think that life is all about us. We need something, a ballast belief to ground us when life is going well, and we need something to sustain us when life isn't going well, when we're getting pummeled at home or pummeled at school or pummeled in the workplace. We need a ballast belief that will sustain us then as well. And may I give you one? As your pastor or one of your pastors, may I give you a couple of options for you to hang on to as the ballast belief that's going to ground you and sustain you for the rest of your life? Here they are. Hebrews 13:5. For God has said, I will never fail you. I will never abandon you. And I want you to look at this right here, friends, because some of you came to Crossroads today to simply hear that. Because you feel like God has failed you. And you feel like God has abandoned you. And God brought you here to remind you of His promise to you. That though it may seem like He's failed you, though it may seem like He's a million miles away from you, that He's abandoned you, that He hasn't. That He hasn't. And the other ballast belief I want to throw out is Romans 8:28. The Apostle Paul, who wrote much of the New Testament books that we have, he wrote these words, and we know. Okay, what do we know, Paul? That God causes what? Everything to work together for the good of those who love God. Look at that. What do we know? Paul, what is it that we know? Well, here's what we know. We know that God causes everything to work together for the good. He's not saying that everything that's happening to you right now is good. No. He's saying what God will do, though, if you love God, what God will do with all the shattered pieces, with all the broken parts, with all that stuff that you just, He'll take it all. He'll take it all. He'll cause it all in some way for some good in your life and for some glory for Himself. Did you hear that? God will take it all, whatever you're dealing with right now, and He'll put it together in some way for some good in your life. And I just want to say, Crossroads, if you grab onto these two, and you make these two your ballast, your core convictions of your life, I guarantee you, whatever happens to you, whatever knocks you down, you'll come back up if you simply will hang on to these two ballast beliefs. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do, and you're going to hate me for it. I'm going to ask you to memorize these two. Oh, Pastor Phil, I can't memorize. I'm over 40. It's impossible. I tried. That would take me about a year to memorize it. No. Don't underestimate your abilities. I want you to take these two. The first one's 14 words, and the second one is 18 words. And I want you to add that up. That's 32 words. I want you to memorize 32 words. Can we do it? There will be a quiz next week. You will never get a cup of coffee or a cookie or a donut at Crossroads again unless you memorize these two These two, yeah. Now, we're going to give you at all of our campuses, just so you know, we're going to give you a card with both of the verses on them as you leave all of our campuses today, so you can put these somewhere where you see them all the time. But right now, at all of our campuses, can we just read them out loud? Because this is the very first step in memorizing anything. Read it over and over. So all of our campuses participating, let's read together. Here we go. For God has said, I will never fail you. I will never abandon you. And let's read the second one. And we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God. Friends, take those 32 words. Just take them and put them to memory. And I believe that when you're up here, that those ballast beliefs will ground you. And when you're down here, those ballast beliefs will lift you back up on your feet and sustain you in your time of need. And if you follow us along on any of our social media platforms, you know who you are, and you all should. But if you have a smartphone, we're going to send you, or on our social media platforms, we're going to have a link so that you could download a picture of those two verses, just like I did on my phone. And so that when you open your phone, which the average American does every 10 minutes. So at all of our campuses, you've already opened your phone 10 times during this message. Yeah, at least. We're gonna have this available for you so you can just put it right here on your phone as you open it up. And you'll be able to see these verses. And we can all memorize them together. All right? Are you in? Are you in? All right, let's pause together and let me pray. And as our heads are bowed right now, I want you to think about where you're at right now. Wherever you're at, and whatever's happening to you right now, I want you to hear these words as if God is speaking them to you right now, because He is. He says, I am with you. I am with you. I will never fail you. I will never abandon you. I am with you right now at school. I am with you right now in your home. I am with you right now in your workplace. I am with you as you wrestle, as you're being pummeled and punched and pounded physically or emotionally or spiritually or relationally. And if you'll just love me, God says, if you'll just love me, I will take all of those broken pieces and I will weave them together for some good in your life. Just believe, and just hold on. And God, we want to thank you that you are with us wherever we find ourselves today. And may that become our ballast belief. May that ground us, God, and may that sustain us. We pray together in Jesus' name.